The rain fell in silver curtains across the empty parking lot, and Elena Vasquez pulled her jacket tighter against the November chill as she locked the elementary school's side entrance. Her shift had ended 2 hours ago, but she had stayed to grade papers, to organize the supply closet, to do anything that kept her from returning to her silent apartment. The fluorescent lights of Westbrook Elementary had become a kind of sanctuary, predictable and safe in ways her life outside these walls had never been. She was halfway to her car when she saw him, a small figure huddled against the chain-link fence at the edge of the playground, knees drawn to his chest, dark hair plastered to his pale forehead. Elena's heart seized. She knew that posture, that stillness that came from a child who had learned that making himself small might make him invisible to whatever hurt was coming. She had worn that same invisibility like armor through her own childhood. "Marcus," she approached slowly, her voice gentle as she crouched before him. "Sweetheart, what are you doing out here? School ended hours ago." Marcus Aldrich lifted his head, and even in the dim glow of the security lights, Elena could see the exhaustion carved into his 7-year-old features. Dark circles shadowed his 2 large eyes, and his lips were faintly blue from the cold. He was one of her quietest students, always completing his work with careful precision, never causing trouble, never asking for help. The kind of child teachers praised for being so mature. The kind of child Elena recognized instantly as one carrying weight far too heavy for his small shoulders. "My driver didn't come," Marcus whispered. "I waited, but nobody came." Elena felt the familiar burn of protective anger kindle beneath her ribs. She had called the emergency contact number on Marcus's file 3 times this semester, with concerns about his fatigue, his occasional flinching at sudden sounds, the lunches he sometimes forgot to bring. Each time, a cool professional voice had assured her that everything was fine, that Mr. Aldrich was simply busy with his business concerns, that Marcus was very well cared for. The dismissals had felt like doors closing in her face. "How long have you been waiting, honey?" Marcus's gaze dropped to his muddy sneakers. "Since the bell. I thought maybe if I stayed very still and very quiet, someone would remember. 3 hours. This child had sat alone in the rain for 3 hours, believing that his silence might summon someone who loved him enough to come." Elena made her decision before the thought fully formed. She shrugged off her jacket and draped it around his thin shoulders, the fabric swallowing his frame entirely. "I'm going to take you home, okay? Can you tell me your address?" The address Marcus recited made Elena pause. Thornwood Manor. Everyone in Westbrook knew that name, that sprawling estate on the hill overlooking the town, its iron gates and ancient oaks, lending it an air of dark fairy tale. The Aldrich family had owned it for generations, though Elena had never seen any of them at school functions or town events. They existed in Westbrook the way old money always did, present in influence but absent in person. Their wealth a kind of gravitational force that bent the community around them without ever directly touching it. She helped Marcus into her aging Honda, cranking the heat to maximum and angling the vents toward him. He sat motionless in the passenger seat, his small hands still buried in the sleeves of her jacket, watching the rain streak down the window with an expression far too distant for a child his age. Elena wanted to ask him questions, wanted to understand the shape of whatever was wrong in his life, but she knew the futility of pushing too soon. Trust was built in inches with children like Marcus, with children like she had been. The drive up the hill took longer than expected, the road winding through dense forest that seemed to swallow the headlights. When Thornwood Manor finally emerged from the darkness, Elena felt her breath catch. The mansion was beautiful, in the way of dangerous things, all Gothic arches and leaded windows, its stone facade gleaming wet under the security lights. It looked less like a home than like a fortress, designed to keep the world at bay. She parked near the massive front entrance and helped Marcus from the car, keeping one hand on his shoulder as they climbed the steps. The door opened before she could reach for the knocker, and Elena found herself face to face with a tall, severe woman in a crisp gray uniform, who looked at her with the kind of polished blankness that expensive training produced. "Marcus, you're late. Your father has been—" The woman's gaze landed on Elena, and something flickered behind her professional mask. "Who are you?" "I'm Elena Vasquez, Marcus's teacher. I found him waiting alone at the school. His driver never arrived." Elena kept her voice steady, but she felt the familiar tension of confronting authority, the old fear of not being believed. "He's been outside in the rain for 3 hours. He's cold and exhausted, and I'd like to speak with his father about ensuring this doesn't happen again." The woman's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, then her expression smoothed back to neutrality. "Mr. Aldrich is occupied with business matters. I'm sure there was simply a scheduling miscommunication. We appreciate you bringing Marcus home. Good evening." The dismissal was polite and absolute, a door swinging shut with perfect practice courtesy. Elena felt Marcus's shoulder tense beneath her hand, felt him begin to withdraw into that careful stillness again, and something inside her refused to yield. "I'm not leaving until I speak with his father." The words came out firmer than she intended, carrying an edge she hadn't known she possessed. "A child was left alone in the rain for 3 hours. That's not a scheduling miscommunication. That's neglect." The silence that followed seemed to crystallize the air itself. The woman in gray stared at Elena with something that might have been shock, might have been respect, might have been fear. Before she could respond, a voice emerged from the shadows of the grand foyer, a voice like velvet wrapped around steel. "Helena, who is making such fascinating accusations at my door?" He stepped into the light, and Elena's world tilted on its axis. Dominic Aldrich was not what she had expected, though she could not have said what she had expected. He was tall and dark, his features sharp as cut glass, his eyes a shade of amber that seemed to hold their own light. He moved with a predator's economy, each step deliberate and controlled. And he was looking at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with warning and something else entirely. "Miss Vasquez," she managed, though her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "I'm Marcus's teacher. I found him waiting alone at the school. No one came for him." Something shifted in Dominic Aldrich's expression, a crack in the marble perfection of his face. He looked down at Marcus, still huddled in Elena's jacket, and for just a moment, Elena saw something raw and wounded in his amber eyes before he shuddered it away. "Marcus." His voice had softened, though it still carried command. "Go with Helena. Have her prepare you a warm bath and something to eat. I will come speak with you shortly." Marcus hesitated, glancing up at Elena with an expression that tugged at her heart. Then he slipped her jacket from his shoulders and held it out to her with both hands, a gesture of such careful formality that it nearly broke her. "Thank you for bringing me home, Miss Vasquez," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for the trouble." Before Elena could respond, Helena ushered the boy away, and she found herself alone in the grand foyer with Dominic Aldrich, the rain drumming against the windows like a heartbeat. "You're angry," he observed. His head tilted slightly as he studied her, and Elena had the unsettling sense of being catalogued, assessed, taken apart, and examined. "You're angry on behalf of my son. Someone should be." She lifted her chin, meeting his impossible gaze, despite the instinct screaming at her to look away, to run, to fold herself into the smallness that had kept her safe as a child. He waited for 3 hours, alone, in the cold and rain, and his only explanation was that he hoped if he stayed quiet enough, someone would remember him. The silence stretched between them. Dominic Aldrich did not blink, did not breathe, did not move in any way Elena could perceive. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something almost inaudible. You drove him here yourself, in this weather, to a stranger's home at night. Most people would have simply called the emergency line and moved on with their evening. Most people haven't been a child left waiting for someone who never came. The words escaped before she could stop them, carrying more of herself than she had intended to reveal. She saw the moment they landed, saw something in Dominic's expression shift from assessment to recognition. He took a step toward her, close enough that she could smell him. Something dark and cold, like winter forests. And she found herself frozen in place. You understand him. It was not a question. You see what others miss. Elena's heart was pounding so hard, she could feel it in her throat. Every survival instinct she possessed was screaming that this man was dangerous, that she should make her excuses and leave before whatever was happening in this shadowed foyer took her somewhere she could not return from. But stronger than the fear was the image of Marcus huddled against that fence, waiting to be remembered. What I see is a child who has learned that his silence makes him easier to overlook. What I see is exhaustion that goes beyond a bad night's sleep. What I see, she paused, choosing her next words with care. What I see is a little boy who needs more than drivers and housekeepers and emergency contact numbers. He needs someone who will actually show up. Dominic Aldrich was very still, his amber eyes burning into hers. Then slowly, he inclined his head in what might have been acknowledgement. You are right, Miss Vasquez. You are entirely correct, and I have no defense to offer. His voice carried a weariness that surprised her. I have failed my son in ways I'm only beginning to understand. The question is whether that failure can be remedied. He turned away, moving toward a set of double doors that presumably led deeper into the manor's shadows. At the threshold, he paused without looking back. It is late. The rain shows no sign of stopping, and the roads from Thornwood can be treacherous in weather like this. You will stay the night. That's not necessary. It was not a request. Now he did look back, and Elena saw something in his face that stopped her protest cold. It was hunger, but not the kind she could name. It was loneliness so vast it seemed to swallow the light. Please, Miss Vasquez, allow me to offer you at least this small courtesy after you have shown my son such kindness. She should have said no. Every rational thought in her head was constructing the polite refusal, the firm boundaries, the sensible retreat to the safety of her car and the familiar walls of her apartment. But Elena Vasquez had spent her whole life being sensible, being small, being the kind of woman who never caused trouble or asked for too much. And something about this man, this strange dark house, this night of rain and rescue, made her want to be something else entirely. One night, she heard herself say, and in the morning, we're going to talk about what Marcus actually needs. A ghost of something that might have been a smile crossed Dominic's face. I would expect nothing less. Elena woke to silence. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, and pale, morning light filtered through curtains she did not remember closing. She was in a guest room of impossible elegance, all dark wood and deep burgundy fabrics, the bed beneath her more comfortable than anything she had ever slept in. For a long moment she simply lay there, trying to reconcile the woman who had demanded to speak to Dominic Aldrich with the woman who had agreed to stay in his home. The knock at her door was soft, almost hesitant. Elena rose and found Marcus standing in the hallway, still in his pajamas, his dark hair sleep-tousled and his eyes carrying that same careful watchfulness. Good morning, Miss Vasquez. He clutched something against his chest. I brought you this. Helena said you might want coffee, but I thought you might like hot chocolate better. You always drink hot chocolate at the school parties. Elena's heart constricted. He had noticed. This quiet, overlooked child had noticed what she drank at school functions and had remembered it at 7 in the morning, had thought about what might make her comfortable in a strange house. Hot chocolate sounds perfect. She accepted the mug from his hands, feeling its warmth seep into her palms. Did you sleep okay? Marcus nodded, but something flickered across his face that suggested the truth was more complicated. Father came to see me last night, after you went to your room. He stayed until I fell asleep. That's good, Marcus. That's really good. He asked about you. The boy's voice had dropped to a whisper, as if sharing a secret. He asked what kind of teacher you are. I told him you're the kind who notices things. Before Elena could respond, she became aware of a presence at the far end of the hallway. Dominic Aldrich stood motionless in the shadowed corridor, watching them with an expression she could not read. In the morning light, the sharpness of his features was even more pronounced, but there were shadows beneath his amber eyes that spoke of his own sleepless night. Miss Vasquez, I trust you slept well. He moved toward them with that same predator's grace, but something about his approach seemed softer, more careful. He stopped at his son's side, one hand coming to rest on the boy's shoulder. Marcus, Helena has prepared breakfast. Why don't you go ahead? I need to speak with Miss Vasquez. The boy looked between them with an intelligence that belied his years. You're going to talk about me. I'm going to talk about making sure last night never happens again. Dominic's voice was gentle but firm. I promise I will come tell you everything we decide. No more secrets about things that affect you. You have my word. Something in Marcus's posture eased. He nodded once, cast one more glance at Elena, and disappeared down the hallway toward the grand staircase. Elena watched him go, feeling the weight of Dominic's attention like a physical pressure against her skin. You made him a promise. She turned to face him, still holding the hot chocolate Marcus had brought her. A real one. I made many promises last night, to myself mostly. Dominic's expression was grave, but there was a vulnerability in it that had not been there before. You were correct, Miss Vasquez. I have been failing my son. I have been so consumed with protecting him from certain dangers that I failed to protect him from the most basic one, the danger of being forgotten by the person who should love him most. What happened to his mother? The question emerged before Elena could consider whether it was appropriate, but Dominic did not seem offended. He turned away, moving toward a window that overlooked the manor's grounds. She died 3 years ago, when Marcus was 4. The circumstances were... He paused, and Elena saw his hands tighten briefly into fists before relaxing. Complicated. Dangerous. I became convinced that the best way to protect Marcus was to keep my distance, to ensure that my enemies could not use him against me. I surrounded him with staff, with security, with everything money could provide. Everything except the presence he actually needed. Your enemies. Elena moved to stand beside him at the window, close enough to feel the strange coolness that seemed to emanate from him. You make it sound like you're at war. Dominic's reflection in the glass smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. In a manner of speaking, my family has been at war for a very long time, Miss Vasquez. Centuries, in fact. There are those who would destroy everything I have built, who would use any vulnerability to tear down what my ancestors sacrificed everything to create. She should have been frightened by the strangeness of his words, by the implications that lurked beneath their surface. But Elena had spent her life attuning herself to the frequencies of hidden pain, and what she heard in Dominic's voice was not threat, but grief. He was a man who had lost something irreplaceable, and had responded by building walls so high he had trapped himself inside them with his own loneliness. What do you actually need? she asked quietly. Not as the head of whatever empire your family built, as Marcus's father, as a man standing in an empty house, with a son who's learned to make himself invisible. What do you need? Dominic turned to look at her then, and Elena's breath caught at the raw emotion in his amber eyes. She could see the war playing out across his features, the instinct toward guardedness, battling against something that looked almost like hope. I need someone who sees, he said at last, someone who notices the things I've been too blind to see, someone who will not be frightened away by the darkness that surrounds this family. His voice dropped lower. I need someone who can teach me how to be the father my son deserves. That's a job description, Elena said, though her heart was beating wildly. You could hire someone for that, a child psychologist, a family therapist. I could. Dominic took a step closer, and she could see the gold flecks in his impossible eyes. But I am not asking a professional. I am asking you, Elena Vasquez, the woman who drove through a storm to bring a stranger's child home. The woman who stood in my foyer and called me to account for my failures. The woman who understands what it means to be a child left waiting for someone who never comes. She should have said no. She should have recognized this for what it was. A wealthy man trying to buy a solution to his guilt, a convenient answer to an inconvenient problem. But when Elena looked at Dominic Aldrich, she did not see wealth or power or the Gothic grandeur of his ancient name. She saw a father who had been drowning for 3 years and had just noticed his son drowning beside him. On one condition, she heard herself say, name it. You don't just hire me. You don't just hand Marcus off to another caretaker and retreat back into whatever war you've been fighting. You show up every day, even when it's hard, even when you fail. You let him see that you're trying. Dominic was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had taken on a strange resonance that seemed to vibrate in Elena's chest. You ask me to be vulnerable, to expose the cracks in my armor to a child who could be hurt by my failures. I'm asking you to be human. She held his gaze, refusing to look away. Whatever else you are, whatever wars your family fights, Marcus needs a father who is willing to be imperfect in front of him. He needs to know that making mistakes doesn't mean you disappear. Something shifted in the air between them, a tension that was not quite romantic, but held the seeds of it. Dominic reached out slowly as if giving her time to retreat, and took the mug of cooling hot chocolate from her hands. His fingers brushed hers, and Elena felt a shock of awareness that had nothing to do with temperature. You are a dangerous woman, Elena Vasquez. His voice was soft, almost wondering. You walk into a monster's lair and make demands of him as if he were any ordinary man. Are you a monster? The question hung between them. Dominic's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. My family has been called many things over the centuries, monsters among the kinder epithets. He set the mug aside and turned to face her fully. But I find myself wanting to be something else when you look at me like that. Something worthy of the trust you showed my son. Elena's breath came shallow. She should ask what he meant about centuries, should demand explanations for the strangeness that clung to him like shadow. But the rational part of her mind had grown very quiet, overwhelmed by the intensity of his presence. Show me, she said instead. Don't tell me what you want to be. Show Marcus. Show yourself. And let me help. For the next several weeks, Elena's life took on a shape she had never anticipated. She continued her teaching duties at Westbrook Elementary, but her evenings now brought her to Thornwood Manor, where she worked with Marcus on his homework, drew him into conversations about his interests, and slowly, carefully, coaxed him out of the shell he had built around himself. More importantly, she insisted that Dominic be present for these sessions, watching from the corner of the study at first, then gradually joining them at the table, learning to engage with his son in ways that clearly did not come naturally to him. The transformation was not immediate or easy. Dominic was awkward, with emotional expression, prone to retreating into formal distance when conversations became too intimate. But Elena saw him trying, saw the effort it cost him to sit still and listen when Marcus talked about his favorite books, saw the way his hands trembled slightly when he helped his son with mathematics, saw the desperate hunger with which he absorbed every small moment of connection. "He looks at you differently now," Helena observed one evening, finding Elena in the manor's vast kitchen. "Both of them do." Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm just doing what any teacher would do." "No," the housekeeper's voice was quiet but certain. "I have worked for this family for 15 years, Miss Vasquez. I have watched Mr. Aldrich retreat further and further into himself since his wife died. I have watched Marcus learn to expect nothing from anyone. What you have done in these few weeks is nothing short of miraculous. It's not a miracle. It's just showing up. For some people," Helena said, her eyes holding secrets Elena could not quite decipher, "that is the rarest miracle of all." The confrontation came on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after Elena had first driven Marcus home through the rain. She arrived at Thornwood to find the manor's gates standing open, in a way they never were. The security protocols Dominic obsessed over apparently abandoned. Her heart racing, she pulled up the drive and found the front doors flung wide, the sounds of raised voices echoing from within. "You cannot protect him forever, Dominic." A woman's voice, cold and musical. "The council grows impatient. The boy is of age for presentation, and your continued isolation is being interpreted as defiance. My son is not a political token to be paraded before your masters." Dominic's voice had taken on an edge Elena had never heard before, something feral and dangerous beneath the velvet. "He is a child. He will be allowed to remain one for as long as I can ensure it." Elena moved quietly through the foyer, following the voices to a formal sitting room she had never entered. Through the partially open door, she could see Dominic facing a woman of impossible beauty, her silver hair cascading over shoulders clad in black silk, her eyes a red that could not possibly be natural. The blood must be acknowledged. The woman's lips curved in a smile that showed teeth too sharp for any human mouth. "You know the laws as well as I do. Better, perhaps, given your father's role in writing them. Marcus carries the royal lineage. He must take his place among us, or the consequences." "Will be what, Serafina?" Dominic stepped closer to the woman, and Elena saw him change. It was subtle at first, a straightening of his spine, a darkening of his amber eyes, but then his lips parted and she saw fangs where human canines should be. "Will you threaten my son to my face in my own domain? You know what I'm capable of when protecting what is mine." "Vampire." The word surfaced in Elena's mind with strange calm, as if some part of her had known all along, had read the signs in his cold skin, and lightless shadows, and ancient eyes. Dominic Aldrich was a vampire, and so, presumably, was his son. And Elena had walked willingly into their world. She must have made some sound, because both figures turned toward the door simultaneously. Serafina's red eyes widened with something that might have been delight. "Oh, how fascinating. The human. The one who's been teaching your half-blood brat to feel things." Her smile sharpened. "She knows now, Dominic. She has seen you. The laws are very clear about witnesses who are not bound to the blood. Touch her, and I will tear this council apart stone by stone." Dominic's voice had gone very quiet, and Elena understood instinctively that this was when he was most dangerous. "She's under my protection." "Protection is not enough." Serafina's gaze swept over Elena with predatory assessment. Binding is required. You know this. Either she becomes yours in blood, or she must be eliminated as a threat to our secrecy." The vampire woman tilted her head. "Unless, of course, she means nothing to you, in which case step aside and let nature take its course." The silence that followed seemed to stretch into infinity. Helena watched Dominic's face, watched the war playing out behind his amber eyes, watched him make his decision. "She means everything." His voice cracked on the words. "She has given me back my son. She has taught me how to be present, how to feel, how to hope for something beyond endless warfare and empty centuries. I will not lose her to your politics." He turned to Elena then, and she saw him fully for the first time. Not the mask of aristocratic control, not the careful distance, but the man beneath, ancient and lonely and terrified of what he was asking. "Elena, I know I have no right to ask anything of you. You owe me nothing, and what I am about to propose is monstrous in its own way. But Serafina speaks truth about our laws. If you remain unbound, the council will send hunters. They will find you, and they will kill you. And there is nothing I will be able to do to stop them." "What does binding mean?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "What exactly are you asking me?" "A blood bond. It would tie your life force to mine. It would mark you as belonging to my house. It would also—" He hesitated, something like shame crossing his features. "It would create an obvious emotional connection, a linking of minds and hearts that cannot be broken, except by death. You're asking me to marry you, vampire style." A startled sound escaped him, almost a laugh. "That is a crude but accurate summary, yes." Elena looked at the monster before her, at the man who had held his dying wife in his arms, and retreated so far into himself that he nearly lost his son too. She looked at the woman with red eyes who waited to destroy her, at the world of blood and darkness that had just opened beneath her feet. She thought of Marcus, waiting somewhere in this vast house, not knowing that his father was fighting for all of their futures. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "I need you to understand something first. Anything. This isn't because you're saving me. This isn't because I'm scared of your council or your laws or your hunters." She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the gold flecks in his impossible eyes. "This is because I watched you learn to be a father again. Because I saw you choose vulnerability when it would have been easier to stay hidden. Because Marcus smiled last week, really smiled, and he said it was because you read him a bedtime story yourself for the first time he could remember." Dominic's breath caught. Elena saw tears gathering in eyes that probably hadn't cried in centuries. "I'm saying yes because I want to, Dominic. Because whatever you are, whatever darkness surrounds your family, you're also a man who is trying. And that's enough for me." The binding ceremony was not what Elena expected. No Gothic cathedrals or blood-soaked altars. Just Dominic and Elena in the manor's library. Marcus watching with solemn eyes from the doorway, and Helena standing witness with tears streaming down her weathered face. The blood exchange was brief and nearly painless, a small cut on each of their palms pressed together, as Dominic spoke words in a language older than any Elena recognized. She felt the bond snap into place, like a key turning in a lock. Felt Dominic's presence suddenly alive in the back of her mind, a constant warmth that had not been there before. And beneath it, flooding through the new connection between them, she felt his love, not just for her, though that was there too, bright and fierce, and terrified of its own intensity, but also his love for Marcus, vast and aching and ashamed of how poorly he had expressed it, his grief for his dead wife, a wound that had never quite healed, his loneliness, centuries deep, his hope, fragile as new spring ice, that this strange human teacher might somehow save them all. I feel you, she whispered. All of you. And I feel you. His voice was rough with emotion. Your courage, your compassion, the survivor's strength that taught you to see broken children and broken men. His hand cupped her face with impossible gentleness. You came to return my son, Elena Vasquez. Instead, you have returned me to myself. In the doorway, Marcus made a small sound. Elena turned to find him watching them with an expression she had never seen before. Hope and fear and longing all tangled together. Does this mean you're staying? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Forever? You're going to be here forever? Elena crossed the room and knelt before him, taking his small hands in hers. I'm going to be here for as long as you'll have me. Me and your father both. Together. Marcus launched himself into her arms with a force that nearly knocked her backward. She felt his thin body shaking with sobs against her chest, felt Dominic's presence behind her, as he wrapped them both in an embrace that had nothing of vampire coldness in it. My family, Dominic murmured against her hair. My impossible, miraculous family. 6 months later, Elena stood on the balcony of Thornwood Manor and watched Marcus chase fireflies across the lawn below. He was laughing, really laughing, the sound rising up through the warm summer air like music. Behind him, Dominic followed with exaggerated slowness, pretending to be unable to catch the boy who darted just out of his reach. The council had been satisfied by the binding, though Serafina's red eyes still followed Elena with something that might have been resentment or might have been respect. There would be challenges ahead, Elena knew. Marcus would have to learn to navigate the vampire world he had been born into. Elena herself would have to adjust to the implications of being bound to an immortal being. The darkness that Dominic had warned her about would not simply disappear because they had chosen love. But watching her husband scoop their son into his arms, watching Marcus wrap his thin arms around his father's neck and hold on tight, Elena found she could not bring herself to worry about the future. They had found each other against all odds, a teacher who noticed too much and a king who had forgotten how to feel. They had built something precious from the wreckage of loneliness and neglect. Whatever came next, they would face it together. A family forged not in blood alone, but in the daily choice to show up, to see each other, to love imperfectly and persistently, until the love itself became perfect enough. Dominic looked up and caught her watching from the balcony. Even across the distance, she felt his smile through their bond, warm and bright and wondering. I love you, his voice whispered in her mind. I know, she sent back. Now stop letting him win every game. He needs to learn that his father is the strongest vampire in the territory. Dominic's laughter rang out across the grounds of Thornwood Manor, startling birds from the ancient oaks. Below him, Marcus giggled and squirmed and demanded another round. Elena closed her eyes and let herself feel all of it through the bond that tied them together. Joy, safety, home. Everything she had spent her life searching for, found in the strangest possible place. Love, she had learned, did not care about monsters or mortals, about ancient laws or unlikely circumstances. Love only cared about showing up, again and again, until even the darkest night gave way to morning.